Welcome to True Echo, the channel where true courage echoes louder than fear, and small acts of compassion ripple into stories that change lives. In today's powerful episode, we follow the journey of a black single mother who risked everything to stand up for a stranger the world deemed dangerous, only to find an entire army standing behind her the next morning. This is more than a story of defiance. It's a story about rebuilding community, rethinking judgment, and redefining power, all from a worn-down diner on the edge of a forgotten town. Danielle Parker wiped the same patch of counter for the third time, not because it needed cleaning, but because her hands needed something to do. Outside, the sun beat down on the dust-glazed street of Millstone, a forgotten town long bypassed by opportunity. Inside the diner, however, the air hung heavy, not with heat but with weariness. The old ceiling fan spun in slow defiance of the summer, clinking with every rotation like an old watch counting down to something unspoken. She glanced toward the back room, where her son Caleb still slept under the faded quilt she'd sewn last winter. A map of the United States was stitched across the fabric in multicolored thread, each state outlined by hand, each border a silent wish that maybe one day they'd escape this town together. But for now, Caleb's world was Parker's diner, and Danielle was its lone caretaker, mother, provider, protector. The ledger on the counter stared back at her. $18.73 in tips from yesterday. Not even enough to buy one vial of her father's medication. Eli Parker, once the pride of Millstone and the hands behind the diner's famed butter cookies, now lay in a hospital bed at Willow Creek Medical, half his body paralyzed, the other half clinging to memory. Every day Danielle worked to afford one more bottle, one more day. Then the bell above the diner door chimed. Danielle looked up automatically, expecting Tommy Jefferson or maybe Rick and Donna, the young couple from down the street. But the figure that entered was neither. Tall, imposing, wrapped in worn leather and shadowed under the brim of a faded cap, the man was a storm-given shape. And on his back, emblazoned in scarlet thread, a skull holding a sickle above the words, Hell's Angels, Georgia Chapter. The room froze. Even the fan seemed to hesitate, its clinking slowing as if sensing the gravity of the moment. Old Tommy set his spoon down. Donna clutched Rick's hand tightly. No one moved. No one breathed. But Danielle. Danielle stepped forward. She walked to the man with slow, purposeful steps. The plastic menu in her hand trembled only slightly. Coffee, she offered. Her voice was calm, but her heart raced. Black, he replied, his voice gravel-coated in exhaustion. Been driving since before dawn. She poured it silently, noticing the hospital band around his wrist, the initials, W.C. Medi. Willow Creek. Her breath caught. She didn't ask questions. She simply said, If you need something hot, I've got fried chicken and mashed potatoes. Sounds good, he murmured, eyes down. Then the door opened again. And this time it wasn't just the bell, it was pressure. A change in the air. Sheriff Brent Holloway stepped in, flanked by Deputy Alicia Monroe. Brent's boots echoed sharply on the tile floor. He moved like he owned the place. Well, he drawled loud enough for everyone to hear. Looks like we've got ourselves a special guest today. Danielle set the coffee pot down. Brent didn't stop at the threshold. He strode right to the counter, positioning himself a breath away from the biker. Hell's Angels, huh? What are you doing in Millstone? The man didn't look up. Breakfast. Brent laughed, hollow and sharp. Sure. Just breakfast. No guns, no trouble, no drugs. Danielle's hands clenched beneath the counter. I'm here because my daughter is dying, the man said. End stage. Room 214 at Willow Creek. The sheriff blinked, visibly caught off guard. But he recovered quickly, sneering. Touching. Still, you're not welcome here. And that was it. That was the moment Danielle made her decision. She stepped from behind the counter, placing herself directly between the sheriff and the man. He hasn't done anything wrong. He's just a father. Sitting. Drinking coffee. Brent's jaw tightened. You picking sides, Danielle? I'm picking decency. Alicia looked down, uncomfortable. Brent scoffed. You'll regret this. I've regretted worse, she replied. But I won't regret doing what's right. The sheriff stood a beat longer, then turned, the threat lingering like smoke. Danielle didn't exhale until the door swung shut behind them. She turned to the man. You don't owe me anything. Breakfast is on the house. He looked at her long and hard, and for the first time, his eyes softened. You didn't flinch, he said. No, she whispered. And I won't. He nodded slowly. Name's Hank. And then, in the stillness that followed, Millstone began to change, but not in the way Danielle expected. The next morning, a sign greeted her at the diner door. Painted in red, jagged letters. No bikers. No troublemakers. Her regulars vanished. Orders were canceled. Her phone stopped ringing. The silence wasn't natural. It was targeted. A quiet execution carried out by neighbors who once shared cookies and coffee. But Danielle didn't fold. She tore down the sign, started the coffee, and opened the diner. That day no customers came. But something else did, an echo. And it was growing. Danielle sat alone at the corner booth of her own diner, a fresh pot of coffee untouched beside her, the bell over the front door hauntingly silent. The red smear of the hate-filled message still stained her hands, no matter how many times she had washed them. No bikers. No troublemakers. It wasn't a warning. It was a verdict. By noon, the online post appeared like clockwork. A blurry photo taken through the diner's window showed her handing coffee to Hank Morrison, the Hell's Angel. The caption didn't bother with nuance. Parker's diner welcomes criminals. Is our town safe? Comments flooded in like poison. Unbelievable. What happened to community safety? She clearly doesn't care about our kids. Shut it down before it turns into a biker hangout. Danielle scrolled, not with tears but with a heavy numbness. The kind you get when the people you grew up with, the ones who used to sit at your father's counter and beg for more of his cookies, now treated you like a stranger. Worse, like a traitor. She didn't reply. She didn't defend. She knew it wouldn't matter. In small towns like Millstone, the truth didn't need to be proven. It only needed to be whispered enough times to become scripture. That night, Caleb came home from school, his shoulders drooped under the weight of more than just his backpack. "Mom," he whispered, tugging on her apron, "my teacher said you're letting dangerous people in the diner." Danielle crouched, brushing the curls off his forehead. "What did you say, baby?" "I said, he looked like the saddest dad I ever saw." She pulled him close. She didn't correct him. Didn't explain. Because in that moment he understood something most adults refused to see. The jacket didn't matter. The symbol didn't define the soul. By evening her suppliers stopped returning her calls. One left a voicemail, "We're not taking sides, Danielle. Just need to assess risks right now." It wasn't personal, they said. But it was. A flyer was slid under her door late that night. "Millstone doesn't need you. Leave." She burned it in the old oil drum behind the diner without a word. The flames licked the air like they were tasting injustice. And still she didn't cry. Instead, she drove to the hospital. Room 214 smelled like antiseptic and stale prayers. Her father, Eli Parker, lay still, his eyes closed, face sunken. But when she took his hand, the old reflex was still there, a faint squeeze like a ghost of the strong man he once was. She whispered everything. The insults. The silence. The sheriff's threats. Her fear. But most of all, she told him what Hank had said, that his daughter, Jessie, was dying, and that no one else had treated him like a father. Except her. "You'd have done the same, Dad," she murmured. "You'd have poured him the coffee." She stayed until midnight. When she returned home, her body was exhausted, but her heart beat steadier than it had in days. She had made the right choice even if it cost her everything. And then the next morning came. Danielle was pouring the first pot of coffee when it started. A low rumble, distant at first, like thunder rolling across hills. The diner windows trembled. The silverware rattled on the shelves. She stepped outside. What she saw made her breath catch in her throat. From both ends of Main Street, motorcycles. Dozens. Then scores. Then more. Gleaming chrome, growling engines, and black leather jackets stretched farther than she could count. Nearly 200 bikers lined up, silent, organized, powerful. Not in chaos but in unity. The lead rider stepped forward, towering, broad-shouldered, with a white beard and a black jacket that bore a patch reading, "Marcus Turner, President, Grim Reaper's Riverside Chapter." He removed his sunglasses and extended a hand. "You're Danielle Parker." She nodded. "Yes." He gripped her hand with warmth and steel. "You gave my brother a meal when the town gave him hate. You stood when everyone else bowed. We don't forget that." Then he turned and gestured. The engines cut in unison. Silence swept the street, louder than their arrival. And then the bikers dismounted. One by one they walked toward Parker's diner, not with fists raised, not with menace, but with bags of flour, crates of eggs, coffee beans, and meat. One even wore a chef's hat and rolled up his sleeves. Danielle gasped, her hands trembling. "For a meal?" she asked, barely able to speak. Marcus smiled. "No, Miss Parker. For dignity. For what you gave my brother when no one else would." From across the street, Sheriff Brent Holloway stood, arms crossed. Watching. powerless. Behind him, Deputy Alicia Monroe looked on, something new in her eyes. Danielle stepped back into the diner and called over her shoulder, "I don't know how to cook for 200 people, but I've got a whole lot of eggs and grit." The bikers laughed, the kind of laughter that warms a soul. Then they came inside. Not as invaders. As family. And Millstone started to shift. Inside Parker's diner, the walls swelled with sound, not of orders or arguments but of conversation. Real conversation. A biker in a sleeveless denim vest explained chess to Mrs. Harriet Dawson, who used to cross the street when men like him rode into town. At the next table, a Latina biker with sleeve tattoos helped Caleb color a motorcycle model with crayons, her laughter soft and patient. Danielle watched it all unfold from behind the counter, not moving, not blinking, as if afraid the dream would vanish if she acknowledged it too loudly. Then came the knock. She turned. Deputy Alicia Monroe stood outside the glass door, no longer flanked by Brent Holloway. Her uniform was the same, but something inside her was not. She opened the door, stepped in, and walked directly to the counter. Danielle didn't hesitate. She poured a fresh cup of coffee and set it down. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The gesture was enough. Alicia sipped, then sat at the counter, her badge gleaming under the morning light, surrounded by laughter and noise that no longer belonged only to Millstone's old ways. Outside, townsfolk began to appear on porches, peeking through curtains, cautiously stepping onto sidewalks. Curiosity overtook fear. The first brave soul was Mick Johnson, Danielle's former classmate, who hadn't spoken to her in years. He opened the door slowly, nodding as he entered. "You still got those cookies your daddy used to make?" he asked with a grin. "In the tin," Danielle said, pointing to the usual corner. Mick turned toward the counter and paused. "Guess I'll have to share them now." He glanced at a biker playing harmonica by the jukebox. "Not exactly how I imagined your regulars, Parker." Danielle smirked. Millstone's got new flavors. From the back, the kitchen roared to life. Roy, Linda, and two bikers turned cooks flipped bacon with precision, tossing biscuits onto trays like they'd worked the line for years. Every counter seat filled. People were sitting together who had never spoken before, breaking bread, breaking barriers. And still outside the window Brent Holloway stood. His eyes scanned the room, no longer with judgment but with disbelief. This wasn't supposed to happen. This was supposed to be his town. It was the law. But now the people he once controlled had found a new kind of order, and it had nothing to do with his badge. Then Marcus Turner stood. Silence fell as he walked to the center of the room. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried like thunder on still water. People like to talk about brotherhood, about loyalty, about law. But what Miss Danielle Parker did last week wasn't about a jacket or a name. It was about something bigger. It was about seeing the man behind the patch. He turned toward Danielle, bowing his head ever so slightly. "She gave my brother dignity when others gave him suspicion. And that is what family does." A ripple of emotion passed through the room. Caleb leaned against his mother. Alicia set her cup down and nodded, just once, firmly. "And let me be clear," Marcus continued, turning toward the door, toward where Brent still stood. "If anyone tries to make life difficult for this diner, they won't just be dealing with a mother. They'll be dealing with all of us. Every chapter. Every state." Danielle didn't speak. She didn't need to. She stood in the eye of a storm she never asked for, a storm that had now chosen her to lead it. When the applause broke out, it wasn't boisterous. It was solemn, full of respect. Even Brent didn't dare cross the threshold. The next moment took Danielle's breath away. The door creaked open again and in stepped Hank Morrison. But he was different. Gone was the dust-covered leather jacket. He wore a crisp shirt, clean jeans. His hair was combed back and his beard was trimmed. But what caught Danielle's heart was his eyes. Still tired. Still raw. But now, glowing with hope. "Jessie," he said, voice shaking. "She's stabilizing. The doctors think the new treatment might work." Danielle's hand flew to her mouth. He stepped forward and hugged her, not a polite embrace but a true one. Full of gratitude. Full of grief. Full of relief. "She wrote you something," Hank said, pulling a piece of paper from his pocket. Danielle unfolded it. In shaky handwriting were the words, "Thank you for seeing my dad. Not his jacket. Not his past. I hope I can be like you someday." Beneath it, a drawing. A woman with curly hair in a diner, surrounded by motorcycles. Danielle didn't speak. She just pressed the paper to her chest, tears slipping down her cheeks. She had poured coffee for a stranger. And ended up changing a family. A town. Maybe even more. Danielle stared at the drawing Jessie had made, lines uneven, shading imperfect, but to her, it was more beautiful than any painting in a gallery. The little girl had captured her standing tall in the middle of Parker's diner, arms open wide, surrounded by motorcycles like sentinels of honor. "Jessie drew that this morning," Hank said quietly. "She asked me to bring it to you, said it's her way of saying she wants to come eat at your place one day." Danielle's voice trembled. "When she does, I'll make her a tray of cookies with her name on every single one." The emotion swelled in her throat, too powerful to swallow. And for a moment, the noise of the diner, the laughter, the clinking forks, the sizzling griddles, all faded into the background. Danielle looked up at the wall where her father's photo hung, beside his old flour-stained apron, a testament to the man who'd raised her to believe kindness was never wasted. She knew he'd be proud. A few hours later, Linda and Roy returned, not just as family to Hank, but as representatives of something larger. Linda embraced Danielle, whispering something only they heard. Roy stepped forward and placed a carefully wrapped package on the counter. It was leather, dark brown with thick stitching. "It's from all of us," he said. "And from Hank." Danielle unwrapped it slowly. Her breath hitched. A leather biker jacket. Not an old one, not worn like Hank's, but new. Custom stitched. On the back, embroidered in crisp white and silver thread, were the words, "Parker's Diner. Friend of the Reapers. Protected." Beneath it, a smaller patch, a shield with a single word, "Protected." Danielle pressed the jacket to her chest, overcome. "He wanted you to know," Roy said, "that you'll never stand alone again." Linda stepped forward and handed her a folded piece of notebook paper. Hank's handwriting, slanted and bold, covered the lines. "Danielle, thank you. Not for the coffee. Not for the meal. Thank you for seeing me. Not the patch. Not the leather. Not the fear. You saw the father in me. And Jessie, she's smiling again. She says she wants to give you a hug one day. I hope she gets to. Until then, wear this jacket knowing something. You are never alone again." Danielle folded the letter, pressed it to her heart, and turned to the wall beside her father's photograph. On the empty hook where his apron once hung every closing night, she carefully placed the biker jacket. The leather creaked softly as if settling into its new home, the silver embroidery catching the afternoon sun. Two symbols now stood side by side, her father's apron and the Reaper's jacket. The past and the present. The baker and the biker. Both protectors. That evening, as the sunlight slanted through the window, a gentle knock tapped at the diner door. It opened not with urgency or hesitation, but with quiet purpose. Brent Holloway walked in. Not in uniform. Not with a badge. No gun. Just jeans, a faded shirt, and a baseball cap pulled low. Danielle saw him, and for a moment neither spoke. He walked to the counter. Sat in the very spot Hank had the first day. She poured coffee. No questions asked. No fanfare. Just the clink of ceramic on laminate. He didn't say anything. Neither did she. It wasn't surrender. It wasn't apology. It was acknowledgement. He sipped his coffee slowly, his eyes scanning the diner now full of people he didn't recognize. Not because they were new, but because he'd never seen them truly before. Not the chess-playing elderly woman grumbling beside a bearded biker. Not the tattooed girl braiding Caleb's hair. Not Alicia Monroe, now seated beside a group of young boys, teaching them how to draw their own motorcycles. And not Danielle, the woman he'd once warned, "You've chosen your side." Because now her side was the town. Brent finished his coffee, placed $5 on the counter, and left without a word. No threats. No glare. Just silence. Outside, the town looked different. Not because the buildings had changed, but because the people had. A slow shift. A recalibration of what they feared. And what they respected. Danielle leaned against the counter, wiping it down as she always had, but with a quiet confidence she'd never known before. In the quiet hum of the late afternoon, she whispered to herself, "This is how change begins." The day after Brent Holloway silently exited Parker's diner without his badge or bitterness, something in Millstone changed, not dramatically, not loudly, but like a splinter being removed from skin. A shift so small it could almost go unnoticed, except it wasn't. By morning, Danielle noticed the difference in the way people walked past her windows. No longer just glances from behind curtains. A few heads nodded. A few people actually waved. Some even stopped. Old Mrs. Miller, who hadn't shown her face since the day of the incident, stepped into the diner at 10:23 a.m. She carried an old black umbrella and a mason jar filled with homemade peach preserves. I thought you might want this for your toast special," she mumbled, eyes down. Danielle took it without hesitation, nodding in thanks. Mrs. Miller looked up, and for a split second the two women, separated by decades of difference, understood each other. That afternoon, a local pastor stopped by with two teenage boys from the community outreach program. One was white, the other black. Both had shy eyes and unsure hands, but the pastor grinned. "Thought you might need help washing dishes," he said. Danielle blinked. "I always need help washing dishes." She stepped aside. No speeches. No apologies. Just the open door of possibility. By Thursday, a traveling food blog with 250,000 followers published a photo titled, "The Diner That Refused to Bow." It featured the leather jacket on the wall beside Eli Parker's apron. Within 48 hours, the post had 32,000 shares. People began arriving from neighboring counties. Some curious, some skeptical, but none left untouched. The hashtag started trending in the regional forums. #Danielle did not flinch. Inside the diner, it wasn't unusual now to see someone wearing a church usher's vest sitting beside a biker in leather. Caleb made friends with a girl named Kiki from Nashville whose dad wore rings on every finger and helped install a new toaster after it short-circuited. It was as if Parker's Diner had stopped being a restaurant and become something else, an ecosystem of broken people mending each other. Danielle didn't post online. She didn't give interviews even though 2 local news crews reached out. She didn't need to explain what had happened. Anyone who walked into the diner could feel it. One afternoon she stood at the sink, arms elbow-deep in soap suds, when she heard a familiar voice. "She's gonna love these." Danielle turned. Hank stood at the door, holding a worn box wrapped in newspaper and secured with twine. His face was flushed from the heat, his sleeves rolled up. Behind him stood Jessie, thinner than the drawing had suggested, her hair wrapped in a bright scarf, eyes wide and luminous. Danielle dropped the dish towel and crossed the room in seconds. "You made it," she whispered. Jessie nodded slowly. "You saved my dad." Danielle knelt, her throat tight. "No, baby. Your dad saved himself. I just didn't look away." The two embraced and the diner went still, not in fear but in reverence. For in that moment, everything they had fought for, all the judgment, all the noise, was silenced by the soft breath of a little girl's arms around a woman who had stood tall. Jessie brought out the box. "I wanted to make something for your wall too." Inside was a wooden plaque, clearly handmade, the letters burned in with a soldering iron. Read, "Home is where someone sees you and doesn't flinch." Below the phrase was a simple sketch of a woman holding a coffee pot, standing between a man and a drawn gun. Danielle didn't say a word. She just nodded and placed it right below the jacket and apron. 3 symbols now: courage, memory, and meaning. Later that night, Danielle walked Jessie and Hank out to their motorcycle. Jessie climbed in slowly, still weak but smiling. As Hank helped her with the helmet, he looked at Danielle with eyes full of quiet emotion. "I've ridden across 15 states, he said. "But this is the only place I've ever felt safe leaving her." Danielle smiled. "Then you both always have a table here." Hank reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small metal pin shaped like a gear with the words Grim Reaper's Guardian Circle etched into it. "We give this only to people who've gone to war without weapons." Danielle took it gently, eyes wide. "I didn't go to war." "Yes, you did," Hank replied. "And you won." The bike roared to life and faded into the night, leaving Danielle standing alone on the sidewalk. Only she didn't feel alone. She felt whole. Inside, the lights of the diner flickered softly, casting warm glows onto the worn tile floors. Somewhere in the back, Caleb was laughing with Kiki. And the air smelled of butter, cinnamon, and something newer: hope. Outside, the sign still said Parker's Diner. But everyone in Millstone knew it had become something much more. The summer air hung thick over Millstone, but inside Parker's Diner, it was different, cooler somehow, filled with a kind of warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. Danielle stood at the counter, polishing glasses not out of necessity but ritual. Everything around her hummed with a steady rhythm. Frying pans sizzling, coffee pouring, conversations blooming like old roots rediscovering water. People kept arriving. Some were locals returning sheepishly, pretending they'd never left. Others were travelers, writers with tattoos and piercings who smiled at kids and left $100 tips in cash. A group of young nurses from Atlanta made the diner a regular Saturday stop, saying the story had gone viral at their hospital. Danielle overheard one of them whisper as they took a selfie in front of the leather jacket and plaque. "She made kindness dangerous." "I love that." It made her smile. Not because it was accurate, but because it wasn't entirely wrong. Parker's Diner was now being written about in blog posts and college essays. One post simply titled, The day courage smelled like coffee had been shared more than 60,000 times. Danielle read none of them. She didn't need validation. She had Jesse's letter. She had Caleb's drawings now pinned to the wall, all motorcycles and aprons. She had a building full of people who had once been afraid of each other, now sharing cornbread. But the most surprising return of all came one late Wednesday morning. Brent Holloway. No badge. No boots. Just a man. Worn down. Alone. He entered quietly, sat at the far end of the counter, and placed a $5 bill in front of him without saying a word. Danielle saw him the moment he walked in but didn't flinch. She poured the coffee. He took it with a nod. No one stared. No one whispered. That silence spoke louder than his badge ever did. He sipped his coffee like a man unsure whether he was welcome or being tolerated. Danielle leaned against the counter, not smiling, not cold. "Still bitter?" she asked, referring to the brew. He set the cup down, cleared his throat. "Still strong." Danielle shrugged. "Some things don't change." He glanced toward the wall. The jacket. The plaque. The apron. His eyes lingered there longer than she expected. "You ever gonna take that jacket down?" he asked. "No," she replied calmly. "It's earned its place." Brent nodded slowly. "Thought so." They stood in that odd, sacred stillness that happens when two people realize the war is over. Brent didn't apologize. Danielle didn't demand it. But the air between them was no longer made of knives. When he left, he didn't say goodbye. Just left the $5 bill and his untouched toast. It didn't matter. The silence had finally said enough. That same afternoon, Danielle received a package with no return address. Inside, a black ceramic mug with the words, "Danielle did not flinch," printed in bold, blocky letters. Underneath was a note typed on plain white paper. "To the woman who reminded us all, standing alone isn't the same as being wrong. Keep standing. We see you now." No name. No signature. Just acknowledgement. Danielle placed the mug next to her father's photo, between the plaque Jesse made and the motorcycle key Hank had given Caleb as a souvenir. She didn't cry. But she did take a long breath, as if filling her lungs with proof that everything she fought for had found roots. That evening, after the dinner rush, she sat by the window with Caleb. The town outside looked the same bricks, same cracked sidewalks, but everything had changed. "You okay, Mom?" Caleb asked, nudging her side. She looked down at him, this boy who'd seen too much and still carried softness in his heart. "I am. For the first time in a long time, I really am." He nodded thoughtfully. "Did we win?" She thought about that. "No," she said slowly. "We didn't win. We just didn't give up." Outside, someone revved a motorcycle engine, the echo bouncing off the storefronts. Across the street, Mrs. Harriet waved from her stoop, holding up a tray of her newest attempt at banana bread, something she'd started baking for the bikers, as she called them now. Caleb leaned his head on Danielle's shoulder. The lights inside the diner glowed like a heartbeat. And somewhere deep inside her, Danielle Parker understood something unshakable. You don't have to change the world. You just have to refuse to let it change you. The final Sunday of the summer dawned with golden light pouring through the glass windows of Parker's diner. The morning chill still clung to the sidewalks, but inside the air buzzed with something deeper than warmth, certainty. Danielle Parker stood in the middle of her diner, surrounded by the life she never imagined would grow from a single act of decency. The faint scent of cinnamon rolls drifted through the kitchen, while the sound of Caleb giggling at the counter as he stirred creamer into his coffee echoed like music she never wanted to end. At exactly 8 a.m. the doorbell rang. In walked Jessie Morrison, her steps cautious but eager, flanked by her father Hank and her Aunt Linda. Jessie wore a purple scarf and a jacket covered in patches, most of them sewn by hand. She smiled wide and toothy, and clutched a crinkled envelope in her hand. Danielle rushed to greet her. "You made it," she beamed. Jessie nodded. "I came for the butter cookies." Everyone in the diner laughed, including Hank, who looked years younger since the first day he'd sat at that counter with trembling hands and a broken heart. Danielle motioned them to a booth near the window and returned with a tray of fresh-baked cookies, each one hand-decorated with a little J in pink icing. Jessie took a bite and moaned dramatically, "Okay, this is worth surviving for." The room erupted in applause. Across the diner, a tattooed biker who used to terrify half the town snapped a photo of the moment. The image would later be printed on flyers for Parker's Diner's first charity event, Cookies for Courage, raising funds for pediatric treatment at Willow Creek Medical. Alicia Monroe came in late that morning, no longer wearing her uniform. She had resigned quietly a week earlier and taken a new job mentoring youth in the next county over. She hugged Danielle, ordered a black coffee and passed Caleb a puzzle book with a wink. By noon, Marcus Turner arrived. He didn't speak at first. Just walked to the counter, ordered his usual and waited until the lunch crowd settled. Then, in front of everyone, he stood and pulled something from his vest, a polished wooden frame. Inside it, a new patch. Read, Parker's Diner, Honorary Chapter. Below it, Where Brotherhood Begins with Breakfast. Danielle stared at it, her breath caught between a laugh and a sob. You made me a chapter? Marcus nodded solemnly. We don't give that lightly. But you didn't just serve coffee. You served a community that didn't even know it was starving. She took the frame, kissed the glass, and placed it on the wall under her father's photo. Her hands lingered there a moment longer than necessary. Then she turned. To everyone here. I didn't do anything special, she said, her voice low but clear. I just didn't look away. And maybe that's all we really need to do, see each other. Not the jackets. Not the past. Just the person. A quiet fell over the diner, not uncomfortable but reverent. Caleb hopped up on a stool beside her and whispered loudly enough for all to hear, My mom's a legend. Everyone laughed, but the truth in his words hung in the air. Later that evening, when the last dish had been washed and the last story had been told, Danielle stood alone in the diner. The night was quiet. Peaceful. She walked to the wall where the jacket hung beside her father's apron. She looked at the plaque Jesse made. At the frame patch. At the mug that read Danielle did not flinch. She reached out and touched each one. Symbols. Memories. Proof. Then, as the final act of the day, she turned off the main lights, letting only the neon open sign stay lit. A sign she no longer saw as just a business necessity, but a quiet promise to anyone watching. You're welcome here. Come in. Sit down. Be seen. Outside, the streets of Millstone were the same. But the heart of the town had moved. It now pulsed in a small corner diner run by a single black mother who once stood between a man and a gun, with nothing but a coffee pot and a spine of steel. She never asked to lead. She only refused to bow. And in doing so, she didn't just pour coffee. She poured courage. In a world where fear often speaks louder than truth, Danielle Parker proved that real change doesn't start with power. It starts with humanity. She reminded us all that standing alone isn't weakness, it's strength waiting to be seen. Her story teaches one vital truth. You don't need a badge to protect someone. Sometimes all you need is a steady hand and the courage not to flinch. If this story moved you, we invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Would you have stood up like Danielle did? What does courage mean to you? Don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to True Echo for more powerful real-feeling stories that shine light where others look away. Sometimes one cup of coffee really can change the world.